Hi, I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and very good to see you all tonight. I'm glad to have David Cranmer Underdown joining me once again on a Wednesday night to bring each other up to date. He's a very avid researcher, and I love to watch his posts on Twitter. I am a very avid researcher and generally put up 6 or 7 posts on Twitter a day, but more than that, I work on doing a show every day of the week. That's Monday through Friday, either at 11 a.m. or 8 p.m. And I just feel like doing live shows is just the most comfortable way for me. I talk to a lot of people that just don't do them. They want everything pre-recorded, and then they can get in, open up a little editing program, and sure. I mean, that's great, but I just have so much that I want to talk about and cover, and so many people I want to talk to, that I don't go that production route. I just want to get the material done, put it out there as best I can, and I am feeling good about it. I feel great about the work that we're doing at McDuff Lives. So again, welcome, David Cranmer Underdown, and thanks again for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm the same way. I feel like I just follow the leads, and it's hard to do anything pre-recorded or written out. So I'm very in favor of just the free flow discussion.
Well, I think it's kind of a momentous occasion when Mark Kulak at Housatonic Live said he's not going to be publishing for a while. And I think, we should thank Mark for all the incredible work that he's done. And he did it for 4 years solid. He actually stepped away from a very active and successful career in order to do this work. And I'm just terrifically glad that he's done it. And so what he's giving us is this incredible archive on his research page at Housatonic. You just go housatonic.live and you can get to all of his material there. It's a treasure. And so thank you, Mark. And you're still posting on Twitter and everything, so it's not like you disappeared, but you've earned a rest, and and so is your family. And so I just once again thank you, Mark Kulak. Great work, great colleague. Thank you.
Well, same from me. I mean, I appreciate Mark's hard work. He's one of my main sources for information. I feel like he's a great researcher. He's a great presenter and a great archivist. And I just wish the best for him and his family, and hope he can come back to it. Everything he said about why he's taking a break made sense to me, and I just wish him and his family the best.
Yes, yeah, and we're going to miss that daily injection of new stuff from Mark. But boy, a lot of people are taking up the torch and moving forward, and I'm really grateful to that. Far too many for me to keep up with, and that I guess brings me back to there's a couple loose ends about the Windbur investigation, and if you don't mind, and I know you're not like one of the first. Uh, in other words, you're getting stuff secondhand, so maybe it's. But I'm just curious enough to ask anyway. Um, do you know why it was that Mark felt that the anthrax attacks had actually been planned for a later time, like in October, instead of when in September or September 11th, when on 9/11? Did, did you catch that?
I'm not sure. A lot of the from what I understand, the theory of the anthrax attacks, a lot of it goes to what Daniel Hopsiker was writing about with the training of the crop dusters, and that they were going to do an attack. And Marcus talked about how he thought that they were potentially planning to do a Thanksgiving Day Macy's parade attack, where there'd be a lot of people out, and they would spread the aerosolized anthrax as a terrorism attack. But again, like, I'm not sure, because it's a big piece of evidence that drew the Winber into the discussion was the fact that the head of the Winber research laboratory, Nicholas Jacobs, he's retired from that job now, and he writes in his local newspaper in Pennsylvania, and he wrote that he met with a former Mossad general and a former Special Forces Army Ranger the morning of September 11th, and that he was told that there was a potential anthrax attack, and was their lab able to do the processing of it. And that was like a big, marker for our research group. Is like, well, we need to know more about that. What was the background of that? And that was what really sparked quite a bit of the interest. And also, of course, Mark long ago had talked about, he had taken, like, saved all of Robert Malone's tweets and his old resumes, and he had done shows talking about how his resume had been modified and that he didn't really talk about the mRNA in his previous resumes, and then he, in his later ones, he did talk about the mRNA. But one of the things that really was a standout in the resume was that he said that he did the staffing and the development of the Winber laboratory in 2000 and 2001. So that was a great point of interest. Was he, in this Winber facility when the plane crashed in Shanksville? Was he part of the team that went out to the crash site? And was he part of the, evaluation of what, was there anthrax there? Was there a biological or chemical attack to go along with the, playing off that information that Nick Jacobs had shared? So those were all like major points of interest that we felt like required more investigation.
One thing, the story told by Nick Jacobs in that article is the only source for the idea that a Mossad and a ranger, I guess an Army Ranger officer, we should expect that, what ranger means, and the Mossad officer came to see him. There's no other evidence other than his word that actually happened. And I wonder, given he might very well be part of a wider scheme of confusing people and making things difficult to understand. I'm just left wishing I knew still more.
Right. Well, the thing that I thought of was, I listened to the old Fletcher Prouty interviews from time to time,
Yeah.
and one of the things he talked about was the part of the SACSA was the deception, and that there was a deception department that was, using the technique of limited hangout, giving, good information and bad information. The example he used was the Bay of Pigs. Are we going to go in with an attack? Are we not? And that they would have, and he said that no one has ever written a good book on the use of deception in, special planning operations. And so that, it could easily fall in that. It could be a piece of bait that Nick Jacobs has thrown out there, and it could be, disproven. But but to me, the interest is still there, because it seems like the entire Winber operation is a classified operation where they don't give any information about it, and it was a facility that was under a security clearance, where they wouldn't be just saying, oh, we're going to talk about this and explain what it is. So I do think that it's possible that it could be a bad piece of information from Nick Jacobs.
Yeah, the hardest thing is when anything is possible, and we just don't know. But we have to keep an open mind. But the thing is, kudos for going and doing all of that work, guys and ladies. A very patriotic thing to do, and this idea of fundamental patriotism very important, and so many of our fellow citizens are really not all that interested in sovereignty or patriotism, and have kind of, speaking of Fletcher Prouty, the whole idea of the secret team is that he's organizing a super state that's not part of the sovereign nations, that they don't even care about boundaries. They just make deals, and then of course then they do their takedowns, at Lansdale, and the whole idea of the whole way that they've taken over so many places with such tragic methods. But that's you know that's the tragedy. That's the tragedy. And people that oppose that, they don't last very long in the system, and it's a shame. That anthrax story has got to be unwrapped. And Mark has done a terrific job of showing. I think he's definitely uh, done the Bruce Ivans story justice, and Stephen Hatfill, and all the connections through Nancy Hagewood, and all of that work that he's done. The names stick with me,
Mhm.
and a lot of other people, I'm sure, are going to follow up on that great work. Um, yeah. Well, what else has been on your mind this week?
Well, I mean, the part of the analysis that I do on is to look at, well, what did we get? Whether or not that meeting happened, or if the first anthrax letters were the ones sent to the media and to Daschle and to Leahy. The end result was that we got the Patriot Act, and that we got the CARES Act, which was a funding for countermeasures and biodefense and things like that. So regardless of whether Windber was the place where it originated, or whether it was the Eisenhower building, or the National Enquirer offices down in Florida, um, the end result is that we got major change to the security state, and also to the allocation of funds towards vaccines and countermeasures, and that goes right into the story of Emergent Biosolutions up in Lansing, Michigan, where they made the anthrax vaccine that was given to the military. And I haven't, it's hearsay for me, but it there was a lot of problems with that anthrax, and I haven't interviewed the people like George Webb has, that, or task force that worked with the people that were directly affected by that. But that's another area that requires a lot of interest, and investigative journalists should be looking at the roots of how we got to the this call for countermeasures, as far as biodefense, and how that became a national defense priority.
And this book that I read a lot from on my Tuesday show, the 2001 Anthrax Deception: The Case for a Domestic Conspiracy by Graham McQueen, is the chapter I read, chapter 3, and it's all about the what he shows is very obviously um, a way to get commander-in-chief powers into the hands of the president without having to have Congress declare war. So the whole idea of this emergency and that emergency, and then define some regulations that if this happens, then he can do this. If this happens, then he can do this. And the way that it ended up being written was it's just like a blank check. It's just that the president is authorized to use all necessary means and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks on 9/11, or harbored or such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Putting all that power of fact finding into the hands of the president by a resolution of Congress that says you now have judicial powers, basically. You now can decide what the facts are. And once you decide what the facts are, you can act on those facts without having either of the other branches of government concurring with you. You have now become a dictator if we allow that to happen. And that is exactly the slippery slope that they've been trying to push us over, and closer and closer and closer. Every emergency they can come up with is getting us closer to the point where the president now has dictatorial powers, and that's it. The Constitution is done. It might not look like it. People might not believe it, but that's along those lines. Let me make another comment that I saw on my Twitter feed. A person had played a little clip on CNN, and it was the three commentators the way they do. And I didn't listen to it, but the text of it was that CNN objects to that Missouri federal judge ruling that the government cannot consult with social media companies in order to affect the content of the media. And you would think that a news gathering organization would be like, yay, the government is now forced to be out of our work, and we can do our own thing, and we can be reporters again. We don't have Big Brother breathing down our neck. But no, what do they say? They say one of the most frightening things that I've seen in a long time. They said that when someone posts a challenge to the validity of our elections, that is a challenge to our national security, that's a national security issue. And because of that, the government must be allowed to censor the media. And they say it so smoothly. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll drink that Kool-Aid. Sure, of course, yeah, they've got to, because, hey, if our people don't respect our elections, then that's the end of the country. Nobody will buy our bonds anymore. So I just see this propaganda war, and it is information warfare. It's not really information, but they call it that. Propaganda coming out of CNN, coming out of all the major news outlets. And I do think that we're winning, though. I do think we're doing a lot better than we did, 4 years ago. And the people out there are a lot more suspicious of the media than they have been in a long time. So I just wanted to add that comment about, what the heck are you talking about? You're supposed to be the news gathering people, and you want the government to censor you because they're afraid that if somebody says something about not believing in the election process, that's a challenge to national security. I just don't see it. That is not a challenge to national security. That is a challenge to the current government. That's what that is.
Well, I haven't followed it that I saw some things about that situation. I haven't followed it that closely. But again, I do like to look at the history of how uh, media has been part of influencing, as you said, like information warfare. Going back to when it was just print, and then to radio, and then going to television, and then going to satellite television like CNN. And the thing I always try to remember is that, NBC, which was, part of RCA, which was the, kind of had the monopoly position on the television broadcast, was based in the RCA building, 30 Rockefeller Center in New York, the exact same building where the Rockefeller Foundation was, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation was, and also where William Stevenson and William Donovan set up the BSC, the British Security Coordination, which was the coordination between the OSS and the SOE. And it also had Alan Dulles in there. So you did a show with Harley where you were talking about the NSM 68, which was the new policy where the president was allowed to use his National Security Council to to determine military actions and special targeted actions, not full scale war, but more surgical strikes. And that, again, that's something that Fletcher Prouty talks a lot about. And he was critical of how during the Iran-Contra affair that same National Security Council could just publicly say, we were out of the loop. That was their official term. We were out of the loop. I didn't know what was going on. And he said, well, if, by law, that National Security Council is the only group that can authorize that action. So if they can claim that they're out of the loop, then there's no stopping these groups that can, organize these actions. So that's kind of the way I look at it, I guess, where it is, I feel like it has been out of control for a long time as far as the election and, the specifics of that. As I've said many times, I'm not a supporter of either party. I mean, I want the, the best for the country and everything, but I just feel like they're used as a trap for people, and especially the election the whole election interference. I just don't I don't put a lot of time into learning about that, because again, I just feel like it's a trap for people. And I don't feel like there's a I don't know. I want there to be characters that can come in and change things and help. But, at this point, I feel like, the whole idea that they can just say that, being critical of an election is you're a national security risk. That's, just goes right into, sort of what we've been talking about, Phoenix program, or, the SS, or, the Gladio operation. It's a way to dossier dissidents and organize them, and come up with ways to, shut them down. So sadly, I feel like that's, again, going back to the 9/11, to the anthrax attack. I feel like that green lighted the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, which was just the American version of the Strategic Hamlet. And as you said, they have people that are very good presenters that can, make it sound like it's, an obvious choice, and not describe any of the historical context of it, or, that the same people that are organizing it here are the same ones that did it in Vietnam, and, that, or their proteges, and that's the legacy of it. And to me, there's great risk and great danger. And, you don't want to seem like you're just, calling wolf all the time. But at the same time, I really am fearful. I really am.
I guess our friend Peter Duke has been for some time, saying, don't bother to vote, it's all, and I resist that. I feel like we're kind of like the people in the British Navy. You have to choose the lesser of two evils, and or three or four. But in this case, I feel like it's more important that we expose the truth that we've been discovering about the military operations concerning biowarfare and how that's been practiced upon the United States and the world, and that the only candidate that's going to open that door for us is obvious. It's Bobby Kennedy. So I'm feel like that it's important that even though the system is corrupt and even though he probably has all kinds of influences on him, and I don't know how he gets away with doing what he's doing, but as long as he's doing it, uh, it's very attractive to me. Just the idea that our work will not be in vain because somebody will actually expose it. So there's, call me crazy, but I do have a glimmer of hope that if Bobby gets elected, everything else might go to hell, but we can stop this crazy bio warfare against the humanity. It's just it's too important, my opinion.
Yeah, I hope so. The characters around him that really scare me is Gavin DeBecker. He was the created I think it's called the National Threat Matrix, which is used to monitor people for kind of the pre-crime theory. He's
Wow.
he's worked with the with the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, and of course he famously did the investigation for Jeff Bezos with his phone hacking. But he has a long career in working with that same. Trying to think of the guy that was working for Kroll that was in the New York. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he was the head of the New York Police Department. Is it Braddock? I think it's Braddock. But he was a guy that was also one of the using these new. They created a CompStat. CompStat was they were using crime-based statistics for crime fighting, and that was part of the story of Rudy Giuliani using this new system to clean up the city of New York. And DeBecker is somebody that has worked with him in that same program. So sadly, I see him as an architect of a strategic Hamlet type system, and that is the head of his security. So again, I'm hopeful that because I do think, I think he's a very intelligent. He's a good speaker, but it really scares me when people like that are his advisors. And then we've talked about Malone a lot, being his advisor on the health things as well. So those are things that again, it's not that I feel like there's good in people, and hopefully they can use their history to be helpful, but it's pretty quiet. It's very quiet as far as their presence in those campaigns. I don't know how much influence they have.
Right. And I, of course, would hope that, and people like J.J. Couey, I think, sees through Malone, and hopefully he still, from time to time, gets Bobby's ear. But, the Malone uh, aspect, as troubling as it is, that doesn't mean that Bobby's not going to figure it out, or at some point, it'll be obvious by the work that people like Mark have done. But uh, as far as the other side of it with this DeBecker, that really gives me the creeps. I don't want a strategic Hamlet program here on Mystery Island. I don't want it anywhere ever. We've studied it. One of the first things we did in the show was we read the Phoenix Program book by Doug Valentine, basically cover to cover, and to talk about the characters in it, and to realize that that they really did that. They really have done that in the past to whole countries. And as I think it was Ted Shackley that I was quoting as having been outside of Langley over there, in Northern Virginia, outside the CIA, sitting on a park bench, apparently, and one of them, there's two guys there, and Shackley apparently said, we're so good at doing this, the American people, they're not any better than anybody else. Why don't we just do it to them? And they are doing it to us, and we don't see it. And we are letting it happen. Well, I'm not letting it happen, and you're not letting it happen. But what else? Is there another alternative besides
I
voting that we
I
can work
say,
towards?
I mean, Shackley's great protege is Kofor Black. Kofor Black at this very moment is, one of the directors of Burisma. And it seems like that is a radioactive thing. If you say Burisma, it's, you get all of the people that were part of the Mueller team that are saying, oh, that's disproven, but that whole story, the whole story of Biden, Joe Biden flying out there and saying if the prosecutor isn't fired, then they're not going to get the money. And then, of course, having, Hunter being working for Bo Schiller and Flexner, being an advisor for that. Devin Archer was also an advisor in Burisma. And these guys are, I don't know. I don't know what the media is doing. I mean, they just are doing the same thing. They're just fighting. Oh, well, that's been disproven. That's conspiracy theory. But again, like, we're talking about 9/11. Who was on George Tenet's, Bin Laden issue station? Who was the chief of that? It was Kofor Black. He then went to work for Blackwater after that. So you've got Blackwater. You've got James O'Keefe going around doing all these appearances with hiking with Bobby Kennedy. Well, he has his own firm now. I mean, he left or he's fired by Project Veritas, but Project Veritas was trained by Blackwater as operators for sort of a dirty tricks kind of investigative service. So I don't know. That's why I feel like people have the opportunity to say what their real role is. But again, I feel like they've positioned people with security clearances and immunities, and they've created the laws where they can kind of say whatever they want. They've got the Smith Mutt. They're not required to be truthful. And if you look at the backgrounds of the fact finding or fact checking services, they're all sort of the same networks where those things come from. So it's a huge task. I don't know. That's why we try to work hard to lay out the characters and everything for people. But and then of course with the the Amaryllis Fox angle with his daughter-in-law. I know it's his daughter-in-law, but she her stepfather is Mitchell Rales, and the Rales brothers and Danaher.
This is all new to me. Amaryllis Fox is a name I'd never heard.
Okay, so Amaryllis Fox, she wrote a book about being a non-official cover CIA agent that was working in the she was working in the African, Middle East, Asian zones under the cover of being an art dealer. And she married, she was going around doing deals as a CIA agent, with an art cover. I don't know how long ago, maybe 4 years ago, she married Bobby Kennedy III. So they're married now, and she's part of Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s campaign with his son, who's his wife. And again, this is where I hate circling everything back to University Street, but Bobby Kennedy III's mother grew up on University Street in Bloomington, and her family, she's the one whose mother, Bobby Kennedy Jr. or III's grandma, taught at the same elementary school in Bloomington as my grandma. And my mom was really good, very close friends with a cousin. They worked at Black Lumber was their family's lumber business. But anyway, so Amaryllis Fox, her parents got, divorced, and then her mother remarried Mitchell Rales. And Mitchell Rales and his brother Stephen Rales were the founder of the Danaher Company. And Danaher is one of the companies that we've been tying into the Winburn Lab, because they are a huge international conglomerate one of the companies that really sticks out that they have acquired is called the Beckman Coulter Company. And Beckman Instruments, for people that remember the history of Silicon Valley, Beckman was one of the, it was actually the parent company of the Shockley, William Shockley and Shockley Industries, the whole traitorous eight that, broke away and, got the first microchips. And William Shockley was one of the, founder of Silicon Valley. That was Beckman Instruments. But they also made the, mass spectrometer, and that mass spectrometer was used by Herbert Hoover Jr. when he was negotiating the offshore oil petroleum deals with like Brazil, Iran, before the Operation Ajax. He was the Undersecretary of State to, John Foster Dulles. But they were using this new mass spectrometer for doing geological surveys and for, figuring out where offshore oil deposits were. So this whole kind of old, Danaher is seemingly one of the major companies that the kind of the Vannevar Bush MIT Rad Lab that became Stanford Research Institute, Hoover Institute, that they accumulated a lot of intellectual property during World War II for the Manhattan Project. And then it seems like over the last 70 years, they've made all these smaller companies with the super genius tech billionaire stories all over the map. But what they're using is the old kind of Manhattan Project, National Defense Research Committee projects that were war projects for World War II. And then they're reapplying the technology for civilian uses. And it seems like Danaher is one of the major benefactors of that program. And so that's another major red flag for me, because that was one of the other things Nick Jacobs said, was that he had this person that during when the anthrax attacks first happened, there was an inspector general from the Congress that wanted the tissue samples from them. And he said some young lawyer, some woman, just destroyed this inspector general, humiliated him. He's never heard from again. And he kind of kept up with her for a year, didn't really keep up with her. I kind of emailed her for, the next 20 years. And then in 2022, that same person said, I have this art collection from Asia and Africa in the Middle East, and the dispossessed French nobles and Mary Queen of Scots art collection, and I want you to hold this. And so that was like, okay, that is a very unusual set of circumstances. How many people could fit the bill to be have the access to art like that? And so, of course, that when I heard that, the first thing I was thinking of was the Cambridge Five, because the let's see, I've got to remember my Cambridge Five. It was Anthony Blunt was the surveyor of the Queen's Pictures, which is basically manages the art collection of the royal family. So I thought, okay, that could sounds like somebody that would maybe get a crack at Mary Queen of Scots art collection. And then when I started studying these Rails brothers, well, Stephen Rails is the her stepfather's brother is the director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which was started by Andrew Mellon, which is, again, Andrew Mellon was somebody that was a huge industrialist from the Pittsburgh area. So it just seemed like there was a lot of kind of crossover in these different kind of odd stories where it seems like they kind of somehow fit into that. And again, there's not that many suspects for somebody that would have access to an art collection like that, because you'd think it would be, in the Louvre or, some, the Vatican's collection, or, the National Gallery in England, or, Metropolitan Museum of Art. and it wouldn't be sort of like up for grabs to give to a a guy that's running a laboratory in Pennsylvania. You just don't. It just doesn't seem like. But again, it could be a it may not be true.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, Andrew Mellon, Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, Andrew Carnegie, Cold Spring Harbor, eugenics,
Mm.
Human Genome Project.
Yeah,
It's all the same thing.
there's a lot to that, and of course the UPMC was where Tara O'Toole and Thomas Inglesby, the people that led the exercises like Dark Winter, and they were at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore before, but then they left Johns Hopkins and went to UPMC, which is the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center, was where they reset up. But if you get into the Mellon, the Mellons are interesting because they are, of course, were with is it Andrew Frick? I think it's Andrew Clay Frick. They were the ones that owned the dam and had the hunting club that was supposed to watch the bridge that burst, and that was the whole Johnstown flood. That was
I don't know that story at all.
Johnstown flood was like the first like major national disaster. It was where Clara Barton first appeared as the American Red Cross in the United States, and it was a big my suspicious mind is I know that that's where my great grandmother's family lived in Pittsburgh and then ended up in Steubenville, and it's supposedly like I think 4,500 people were killed and all of the old records of anybody that lived there was wiped away. But that was also around the time that the Bessemer process was being introduced, and there was sort of a new technologies in metal manufacturing, and of course the Bessemer Trust was set up by a guy Philip. I forget his first name, but he was the neighbor of Andrew Carnegie, and he was one of the co-founders of Carnegie Corporation. But he, of course, was also the one that created the psychology. Phillips psychology at Johns Hopkins. So he's also deeply tied into the Hopkins angle. And then his daughter, this is just rambling, but his daughter was named Amy Phillips Guest, and she married Winston Churchill's cousin. And when John Paul Mellon was first starting his career as an art collector, he was inspired by her apartment in New York City. He went to visit her, and she had all this art collection. So there's this kind of like legacy of Pittsburgh and art, because of course Andrew Mellon also was the when he left as the Treasury Secretary, he then started the National Gallery of Art, and he was the big benefactor of the National Gallery.
Yeah, what a place to go and visit. We always, as children were taken there and going to them all, go to the Mellon Art Gallery, we called it, the National Gallery of Art, and the extension of it. Great stuff. Probably we don't deserve to have any of it, but it's there, and I'm glad we have it. It's Washington's got some great stuff, and one of them is a lot of great museums. Well, a little bit of rambling is not too bad once in a while. I certainly do enjoy indulging in it, and especially with somebody who has so many great, things binging off here and there in the brains. There's this connection and that connection and all that.
We've talked about Carnegie a lot, and they're so fascinating because of their influence in library sciences, but also in education. The Carnegie Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation were involved in the Flexner Plan, which changed the direction of healthcare so they're a really important connection.
Yeah, but I didn't get the story about the dam. Go back and tell me
Oh,
that.
so it's the Johnstown flood. It's in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and they had a flood. It was called the South Fork Dam, and there was a group of industrialists that wanted to have a hunting and fishing club, and I think it was called South Fork Club. But it was based off of Crockett and Boone, the one that like Teddy Roosevelt was the big, that was like his big club, and they bought this property, and part of the property they owned was this dam, and they were supposed to keep up the dam and secure it and whatnot, do maintenance on it, and then the dam broke and it flooded out like a huge area, and it became a national. I think it may have been the first national disaster declared in the U.S. I'll have to look it up, but I know Clara Barton was involved in the disaster recovery, and it was where the American Red Cross kind of, I think, had its first appearance in the United States. Of course, the American or the International Red Cross, of course, being the Swiss history of the Durant, another name that lingers, because Durant was the same name as the original founder of General Motors, was Thomas Durant.
But what's the Durant connection to the
Oh,
Red
the
Cross?
founder of the International Red Cross was a Durant, also a Swiss man,
Okay.
and he was a medical doctor. But the other Durant that plays into it is you sent me a long article today about this the history of the B'nai B'rith,
Yeah.
and is a Jewish organization, very old. And one of the main characters involved in that was a guy named William Seligman, who was a banker that did the under Grant. He basically created the economic policy, but he was involved in a couple scandals. One was in Saratoga Springs. There was a hotel there that they said that they wouldn't let him stay in because they were anti-Semitic, and they didn't wouldn't let him take a room there. Of course, the owner of the hotel was a guy named Henry Hilton, who was the owner of the Stewart's department store in New York. And of course, what they don't say is that Stewart's department store and Seligman were like arch rivals. But anyway, so Seligman has this the great anti-Semitic event of him being not given a hotel room in Saratoga Springs, New York. So a lot of the elite Jewish families decide to buy properties in Lake Sarnac in the Adirondacks. And the person that's selling the properties is Thomas Durant. Let's see, I should have looked this up before. There's a father and a son. The father, Durant, was the started Credit Mobilier Bank, which was the Credit Mobilier scandal was the Transcontinental Railroad, and he was also the president of Union Pacific. And then it went bankrupt, and then he moved to Adirondacks, and he had all this land in the Adirondacks, and his son was selling these properties. And of course, one of the families to buy a property was this Knollwood Club, and the Knollwood Club was owned by six Jewish families. One of them was Lewis Marshall, who was the founder of ADL. He was the lawyer for, I'm trying to think what the Frank that started the ADL in Georgia. But he was law partners with Guggenheim's and Samuel Untermeyer. And then it was Prix Blumenthal. She was the daughter of Eugene. She was the sister of Eugene Mayer, who, was the Federal Reserve chairman, World Bank chairman, bought the Washington Post, all that. Lazard guy. His daughter or his sister was married to Blumenthal, not Richard Blumenthal, but a different Blumenthal that was the head of Lazard at the time. And I'm trying to think of the other. Basically, all of the Lazard Frere families were part of this where they had they go to the lake there. It was their vacation house. But where it ties into my personal story was when my grandpa, his dad died in 1930 in Barton Hills in, Ann Arbor, Michigan. He died in a car crash. And then my grandfather, when he was 14 years old, ingested a peanut, is what they said. It collapsed his lung. So he was sent to live in an iron lung at the Trudeau Sanitarium, which is the property adjacent to the Knollwood Club. And that was where he lived for 2 years from age 14 to 16. And that's, just an interesting sidebar, but it's interesting because my great grandma blamed Henry Ford for his death, and Henry Ford was attacked by Lewis Marshall for the Dearborn Independent for his newspaper. He was Marshall and Untermeyer were the ones that attacked Ford, and then of course Ford does the negotiation with Konrad Adenauer to create Ford Germany. And then Konrad Adenauer is the same person that is, negotiating with Nahum Goldman, who is the chairman of the Jewish World Congress, who's doing reparations from World War II. And then Konrad Adenauer is also the person that Richard Bissell and Charles Cabal are negotiating to have the U-2 fly from Germany. So there's a lot of crossover between Ford and this B'nai B'rith group, which seems impossible. And this is one of my major things. I'll never stop trying to figure out how this is possible. How is Henry Ford II, the grandson of Henry Ford, best friends with Max Fisher? How are they best friends?
I think this little article does. I mean, it's not little. I'm going to get it up on my other screen so I can share the reference with people. So hang on a second.
The other sidebar with the Seligman family was I talk a lot about this Hermann Joseph Muller, who was a geneticist that won the Nobel Prize for radiating fruit flies. He was in a Columbia literary club that only had 10 members. And one of the members in it with him was Donald Barr's father, was a student, and the student advisor of the program was William Seligman's son, who was a professor at Columbia. So there's a lot of, crossover there as far as Muller, Barr, Seligman, and then of course the Huxley side, because Julian Huxley pulls Thomas or Hermann Joseph Muller out of Columbia to go to Rice University to start the biology program. So now you've got the whole Huxley, Darwin, Galton. I mean, I know people are talking about that, but people have to remember Galton, Darwin, Wedgwood family are all related, and Huxleys are also intermarried to the Darwin and Galton families. So it's not, that they may be cousins or whatever, but when you talk about these old families, that is the specific family.
I'm going to share the screen here so folks can get a hold of it themselves. It's on a platform called minds.com, and the article is captioned B'nai B'rith, the Confederacy and the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, a Jewish wet job by somebody called Arrow. It's a compilation of things. A lot of it comes from the really great work of the EIR staff that made the very first Dope Incorporated that I got in the mail the other day, first edition. And in here, the authors put together a very strong case, and it's reinforced strongly by this article in Minds that I'm referring to, that the B'nai B'rith and the Knights of the Golden Circle were virtually the same thing. Now, the Knights of the Golden Circle, right, are the pre-Civil War Klan types, the ones that are wanting to form what they called the Golden Circle of slave plantations around the entire rim of the Caribbean, or all the way around through Mexico and the northern part of South America and all the islands and Cuba. And all of that would be their golden circle where they would get rich by running all these slave plantations. And that was the Knights of the Golden Circle. Well, that idea, um, which was very popular at the time, uh, what does it have to do with B'nai B'rith? Well, the thing they have in common is that they are both, according to these authors, started by Lord Palmerston in London as a way to divide and conquer the United States. And so that is exactly the same relationship you're talking about with Henry Ford and one of the prominent Jewish bankers. And gosh, I think it was Aaron Adler. It was definitely Aaron Adler that gave me a copy of Herzl's book. I can't remember the name of the book, but the original book about Zionism, and how really just shocking it is to think that uh, what they were doing was creating a kind of an elite form of Judaism and manipulating all of the what they would call the old style, or the original Jews. And the reason all that goes together is because they're all making tons and tons of money, no matter what, whether you're Jewish or Irish or Anglo-Saxon. If you're in this deal, you're going to make a lot of money. And unfortunately, that's the way that our country has acquired, this wonderful assets, but they all belong to a very small elite group of people.
Well, it's, reading that article, like it definitely sparked a lot of things that I've looked at. And, one of the, and you mentioned this with Professor Hamamoto, how the idea that the Midwest is this underrated power. And I do try to unravel that. And one of the things that is part of that was like it said in that article, it's the dry goods merchants and Kuhn and Loeb, which we talk a lot about, and people think of the Warburgs and the Schiffs and that, the sort of those charismatic frontmen. But that started in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then there was another department store that was the rival of Macy's. And I'm not going to be able to think of the name of it, but that started in Vincennes, Indiana. So I've been looking actually at there was a secret treaty for the Illinois territory before it became the Northwest Territory, and that I think is part of this Knights of the Golden Circle and the Copperheads, because again, those are all my family. And one of the other things that sticks out like a sore thumb is it talks a lot about Manzini starting the young Israel, young Italy, young everything, young Israel is the kind of the foundation of B'nai B'rith. Well, Manzini was a student of a guy named Robert Owen, who was a Scottish merchant who's married the daughter of the founder of the Bank of Scotland. But of all places he could have gone in the world, he went to New Harmony, Indiana, which is on the Wabash River, which is where both my grandma and grandpa on my mom's side both grew up, like right there. That they're McClures, and they're literally, it's Paducah, Princeton, Mount Olympus, New Harmony. I mean, it's literally that close. But you also have characters like John Watson Foster, who was the grandfather of the Dulles brothers. He was from Richmond, Indiana, which again, one city over. So there's a lot of interest for me in how these sort of Midwestern, because again, that whole area was part of New France before this, the French and Indian War, and then they had the War of 1812, and they sort of like redrew the maps and everything, and America got a lot more land but what I think the Knights of the Circle is to not leave out. I mean, the Caribbean is really important, but the Ohio River and the Mississippi is critical in that, because I think the Circle was they wanted to connect either the Chesapeake Bay with canals to the Ohio River in Pittsburgh, and that was going to be the Circle, because then they can take the Ohio to the Mississippi to New Orleans. And that's why New Orleans, in that article you sent, was such a key point of power, was New Orleans. It talks about United Fruit Company, and it talks about, Samuel Zemurray, Sam the Banana Man, becoming this hugely powerful United Fruit person. But of course, United Fruit brings in the Cabot family from Boston, or the Lodge family. It brings in the Sullivan and Cromwell, but it also brings in the Max Fisher. He became the head when Eli Black, which again is a story that doesn't seem possible, how what is supposedly the rebranding of the East India Company, which is owned by the old Brahmin families of Boston and the most powerful banks in America, United Fruit Company, how it can be taken over by a guy that was a rabbi that late in life decided he wanted to go into fruit. And that's Eli Black, the father of Leon Black, who is the protege of Michael Milken, also referenced in that article. So how does that happen? What are the partnerships, and when did it change? It later was acquired by the Carl Lindner, who was a Cincinnati guy that worked with the Charles Keating, the whole Keating 5 scandal. They owned United Fruit, it then became Chiquita, and now it's owned by the family that is partners with Bill Browder and Hermitage. So it's so ridiculous. Like, you have these the links of it it's very confusing. That's why it takes a lot of researching the histories of the family. But the whole idea of controlling the Midwest, which is sort of the breadbasket of America, and having that ability to get the grains and the produce from the Midwest, and then having a logistic network, that's what I think the Knights of the Golden Circle was. And so I don't know, because my family, I feel like they never talked about any of this stuff at all. They never mentioned it. They never were like, oh gosh, I wish we were back in the Copperhead days or whatever. But at the same time, they did those McClures from southern Indiana did fight with Eli Lilly in the Civil War. And of course, Eli Lilly was one of the great morphine dealers of America to this day, is a powerhouse pharmaceutical company. So Lilly has a rich history in Indiana.
Which side did he fight on?
Well, Indiana was fought for the North. There was the Kentucky relatives that were split. Kentucky was the one where it was like you were either for Breckinridge or for Clay or whatever, and that was like the but again, and another thing that I've looked at that I feel like is completely never studied is called the Black Patch Tobacco Wars. And that was J.B. Duke. Of course, Andy, we were talking about before, Andy's down in North Carolina, and Duke University's J.B. Duke. But they sent raiders, they call them night raiders, to Kentucky, and they burned people's farms and, burned their barns and whatnot. And and again, J.B. Duke was the one that was partners with Julian Carr. Julian Carr was the one that staked Charlie Sung. Again, an unbelievable story, how a Chinese Bible salesman from North Carolina can give birth to the daughters that marry every future leader, seemingly, of China. How do you go from selling Bibles? It's a bad, there's a lot more to the story. Let's put it that way. And of course, J.B. Duke is a superpower. So, British American tobacco. So same thing you're talking about, Palmerston, tying the American trade to the, Chinese trade. JB Duke and Doris Duke. She's the one that bailed out the Marcoses. So it's a lot of connections between. It's not just a flight of fancy, I guess, for me to think that the Black Patch Tobacco War should be reinvestigated by people.
All right. Well, I'm seconding you on the Black Patch Tobacco War investigation, but I want to go back and just make one more point because there was two things I wanted to make sure and say, and just to thank you for pulling all those amazing threads together. One is when you mentioned the connection to the Red Cross, and I think, well, a lot of what's going on has to do with blood. And the Red Cross, what they collect blood, and obviously the Swiss creation of the Red Cross was also a spy organization, so that when they would send their Red Cross people out to serve on a battlefield with an ambulance, they would come back and report military matters to the Swiss government. And that model may well have been followed, and maybe somebody felt that we needed a Red Cross in this country. And gosh, these disasters are never let a good disaster go to waste, as Rahm Emanuel has said so famously. The other one I wanted to say was Mazzini, Mazzini, just for the record. He is so important, and especially in Europe and especially in Italy, because you probably folks remember from history of the revolutions of 1848, right? Well, what happened was, after the Napoleonic Wars and after the defeated Napoleon, there came in this new system that was organized by this guy named Metternich, the Austrian. And this new system was basically to exclude any possible Republican uprising anywhere in Europe. It was all about reinforcing the old regimes, militarily, totalitarian control over all the countries. And by the 1830s and 1840s, there was a lot of popular resentment, and people started having, because the population was growing, they weren't getting paid. And so revolutions were starting to become possible. Well, when you're a wise person sitting behind the bank, and the board of directors, and you think, the natives are getting restless. What are we going to do? I know what. Let's create the leaders of the opposition and put them on top of all the opposition parties, and then we can let them yell at us and scream at us and do whatever they want, but they're ultimately going to be responsible back to us as long as we're the ones that put them in the position. And the major agent of Palmerston, as created through your man Owen, was Giuseppe Mazzini, and he created young Italy, young Germany, young France. There's a young England, and I don't know how many others there were, but it was all patterned in the same way, so as to create a kind of a secret society based revolution that was successful in Italy. And I think other places, they succeeded in getting a better deal for the working class, a better deal. This was the original idea of the good side of liberalism, that we're going to at least be able to make enough money to feed our families and have a day off at the end of the week. That liberal ideal still is in the hearts of people that are still using the word liberal, but it's the word liberal doesn't mean that no more. Anyway, Mazzini is a character that everybody should start becoming familiar with. He's more famous, a lot more famous in Europe than he is here, but he was the leader of the 1848 Young Europe movements. And just wanted to toss that in there, because when you say that this is all tied in, to Indiana and Bloomington and all of the Midwest power structure, then you see that these are all tentacles that all have reached into our country from the ancient wealth that sits in now, wherever it is, in the city of London, or, still in Venice, or in the BIS in Switzerland, or under the mountains of Antarctica somewhere where we'll never find it. That big pile of money is still running an awful lot of secret stuff. And all of these things that we've talked about tonight can be traced back to somebody's scheme to increase the wealth by getting a little piece of it as they pass it on up to the next level in the pyramid.
Well, just to follow on that, like Eugene Debs was from Terre Haute. He was a great founding father of unions and organized labor in the United States. So that's another one. And then also with the name Durant, if people remember, he was sort of run out of town by Pierre DuPont and John Jacob Rascub at General Motors. He and again, I don't know if they're just the cover stories or whatnot, but he supposedly ended his career flipping burgers at a bowling alley in Flint, Michigan, after he had founded the largest corporation in the world, General Motors. But of course, John Jacob Rascub was the treasurer of the Knights of Malta. So a financial genius of Pierre DuPont's personal secretary. So again, tying in the old French nobility, the Louisiana Purchase was originally pitched by, I think it's Ethel DuPont, the original settler in Delaware. He was the one that worked with the U.S. government on that plan to buy that same territory we were just talking about, the Louisiana Purchase. And of course, Rascub also has intrigues with the Empire State Building, as we've talked about. He also, his property in Claymont, Delaware, became the school. Let's see, it's I can't think of the name of the school. It's the school that Joe Biden went to, Hunter Biden, Beau Biden, Ashley Biden. That was on his property. And then his other property is the one down closer to you in Pioneer Point that became the Russian Retreat House. That was another John Jacob Rascub property. So again, I don't know if John Jacob Rascub is really a John Jacob Astor, with a remade name, or if he's connected to like the Italian side, like you suggested. The DuPonts are, have a history in France, but as you study the old families, it's not like anybody just stays in France. It's one daughter goes to Italy and becomes, marries the Italian or the German or the Austrian, so there's a lot of crossover, and that's what makes it really confusing, because you can't just say, oh, it's, the English or the French or the Germans, because they are all so intermarried, and that's why you have to like go through the characters and figure out the organizations.
Right. So let me pick up on those things while I've still got two or three brain cells working. You mentioned Knights of Malta, and people don't realize it, but the Knights of Malta were almost run by the French for a while, and certainly around the era of the American Revolution, they had ships. They had a lot of ships, and they did business, and they took care of each other, and they did, they worked as knights as well, conveying a caravan, or conveying a fleet, for instance, of commercial value. Now, who was the most important Knight of Malta in the American Revolution? Well, it was the admiral of the fleet that was down in the Caribbean, the French admiral, the Comte. Oh God, who wrote the Count of Monte Cristo?
Just stump me on that one.
Three Musketeers. Okay.
Hopefully, the audience knows it.
Well, the brain is obviously fading, but it is the. All right. What about Who's that science spokesman that's African American and has really big eyes, and he's always talking about science, kind of like the astronomy guy, Tyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Okay, so it's the Comte de Grasse. The Comte de Grasse is the admiral of the French fleet that sails up in October of 1780, what, 83, I think it was, or 82, and bottles up and cuts off Cornwallis from the British fleet, causing Cornwallis to have to surrender to George Washington. That was done by a Knight of Malta. Now, these the same thing, the Knights of Malta that you're talking about, that are connected to the Northwest, to the old French Northwest, and then to New Orleans, the French New Orleans. And now, when we were talking about the reference we were making to the article in mind.com, the first person that started the mafia, it was a Sicilian mafia, but the guy that started it was from Malta. And that's in that article. You can read that. So this has just been an amazing show tonight, tying all of these things together. And wow, the debt that we owe to the Knights of Malta might be bigger than we thought, because we would have never won our revolution if the Cornwallis had been able to, meet with the British fleet. But everybody says, that was the French king's decision, but was it really? Maybe just so much intriguing. All right. Well, I've enjoyed it, David. Thank you so much.
Well, it's always fascinating, and of course with you being in Maryland, you can never leave out your Patterson family marrying into the Jerome Bonaparte family. So that's another intrigue with the French and with the what was the Catholic colony of Maryland. So there's a lot of untold history of the United States that relates to this kind of stuff.
Well, I'm enjoying it immensely, and we're going to keep on unfolding it as best we can here at McDuff Lives. Thanks again, David Cranmer Underdown. Tomorrow night, looking forward to a special show with Nick from Twitter, who's come out with his last name. It's Petoskey, and Nick Petoskey, a real expert on what he calls medical primatology, the secret programs of mixing primate blood, primate serum, primate cells into human bodies, and the results have been very, very interesting, including what's now becoming a pretty famous virus called the SV40, the simian virus 40, which I do believe I have, because I took that sugar cube back in the early 60s, and we'll be talking about that and what it has in terms of the present medications, in which there's some snippets of that virus that have been apparently inserted into the vaccines by some of these companies. Very interesting discoveries going on all the time. So Nick and I will talk about SV40 tomorrow night, and I hope you can join us for that. Good night, everybody.